With the best news possible for the crypto industry seemingly slapping us in the face day after day, many are wondering, why the fudge is Bitcoin not going up? Why are my altcoins down so bad? Why am I not a guerrillionaire yet? So in this video, I'm going to be going over exactly what is happening, why I believe the pump isn't pumping, and exactly what I think is the best thing to be doing right now. So if even thinking about the pump that's about to come gets you all ooey gooey inside, hit that like and subscribe, get signed up with FEMX or BITUNIX below if you want to buy Bitcoin, altcoins, or trade. And without any further ado, let's absolutely talk about the price of Bitcoin. Primarily, I want to talk most of this video about very clearly what we see, Bitcoin trading still within this range, not yet pumping. And that's exactly Bitcoin, altcoins, that is exactly going to be what I talk about in most of this video, because the comment I've been getting the most, people are feeling demoralized, down in the dumps, asking themselves, should I have invested in Chuck E. Cheese stock instead of Bitcoin, right? People are just starting to question themselves. And I want to talk about that. But there are some very big pieces of news that I want to dump into first here. We see that the Czech president signed a law removing capital gains tax on Bitcoin after over 3 years of holding. That is beautiful, and I think that's a really good idea. We as well see that the Federal Reserve's reverse repo facility is plummeting. Quantitative easing and money printing will start aggressively when this drains to zero, and Bitcoin will explode big time. We see that the former PayPal president and Lightspark CEO David Marcus saying that Bitcoin is a better version of gold and should be in a U.S. strategic reserve. Again, so far, I've just talked about three just quick pieces of news that we've seen today. And if you would have said these things on their own a year ago or back in 2023, it would have been very bullish. And I think the market maybe would have pumped. But the big question is, why isn't Bitcoin pumping on this news? We see here, according to Fred Krueger, honestly, Bitcoin should be at $250,000 right now. The bearishness is insane. This is exactly why you're watching this video, because you want to know, why isn't Bitcoin pumping? But unfortunately, we have to look at a few more things. ARK Invest projects Bitcoin will hit a top of about $1.5 million in the next 5 years. This is what it would look like. This is where we are right now. So if you think you're late, let's say this ends up happening. Let's be a little crazy and think that yes, Bitcoin actually will pump big time. Look where we're at. Imagine the ending of diminishing returns for Bitcoin and a true inflection point. Now that gets me going. We as well see this, Matthew Hyland pointing out that we got a massive wick on Bitcoin dominance over the last few days, and it was direct evidence of people giving up on alts. We are seeing this across the board, actually. A lot of people are capitulating on alts. A couple of months ago, back in August, there was no wick like that on Bitcoin dominance when the market crashed. Basically, what he's saying from here is that the whole point that he's saying is that retail capitulated to larger capital that are buying cheap. And we did see it. We did see a decent amount of capitulation. Well, I'm also seeing it in the sentiment, in terms of sentiment and across the markets in general right now. But obviously, I don't think this is the time to be capitulating. But Joe Burnett on X also talking about something, I'm sure you're very well aware of, and I've seen many iterations of the same thing, but really where it's at in the cycle, where the overbought versus oversoldness is, if we just look at a simple chart like this, I don't think we're anywhere near a top. But people are starting to doubt that, because we've been trading sideways for almost 3 months now. And people are asking themselves, well, if we're in the middle of a bull market, why are we not pumping? Because every metric, like the one you see on the screen right now, every long-term, this is a 3-month chart, by the way, every metric you see basically tells us, no, if this cycle is anything like any cycle before us, which in fact, this should be a stronger cycle, if this cycle is anything like what we've seen before, we are not close to a top whatsoever. But people simply, the only reason people are scared and questioning, and a lot of people, it's a growing number of people scared and questioning why we aren't pumping. The only reason that so many people are shifting day after day now to becoming bearish is for 2 reasons. Is because Bitcoin is trading sideways, but again, alts have massively underperformed. And very clearly, alts still look disgusting. Bitcoin, however, is forming an ascending triangle pattern on the daily chart, is a bullish continuation pattern, very similar to what we saw months ago before Bitcoin busted from about 69,000, nice, to over 100,000. It has found support at the upward sloping trend line, and if it holds the current level, we're going back to new all-time highs. And as well, we did also just see Iowa joins the Bitcoin reserve race. So as you may or may not know, the price of Bitcoin is in part determined by the money supply. And since the very beginning of 2024, so for the past 14 months, the money supply has been increasing. Bitcoin has gone up, and it actually was going up before we actually started seeing the money supply increase back in 2023. But we're seeing, again, every macro signal, every technical you can look at, all of the major ones, whether it's a top signal, whether it is these longer term indications, whether it is quite literally the money flow or the money supply, all of these things, especially the biggest and newest one is that there's positive crypto framework in the US coming and already starting, instead of getting cracked down and subjugated. This is also showing a bullish setup. So why isn't Bitcoin pumping? Clearly, on the daily chart, since the very beginning, or the middle of November, when we first broke above 90,000, we have just bounced around 110 and 90,000. So, as I said, it's been about almost 3 months that we've been doing this, and it's killing people's ability to be optimistic on this market. Not to mention, Bitcoin is down about 0.2% today, and on the side of my screen, these top altcoins are down anywhere from like 3 to 10%. Altcoins continuously suffering, and that is making it so much harder for people. And I want to speak as well a little bit on my own personal experience with this. I've been invested in this market for about 8 years, and many times, especially in bull markets, many times there are things that happen that make you think, wow, this should be pumping the price. And many times, I'm thinking back, so it's anecdotal and I'm just using my own experience and my own history with this market. Many times that will happen where you just think, why isn't it going up? It should be. What is the reason it's not? And if I'm being honest, at least every time that I can think of that I thought, why isn't it pumping? It should be going up. And it also lined up with the technicals, and it lined up to where we should be pumping in the cycle. Basically, when we were in periods where it was very obviously a bull market and we were getting good news, but the price wasn't pumping, every single time in history that I remember that distinctly happening, it did eventually pump. And overwhelmingly, my comment section was full of people saying, why are we pumping? Explain why. What's the reason? And the thing is, just because they look very positive and they're bullish, does not mean that the price pumps right away. At least from my past experience, in these bull markets, it does. And it does do exactly what you think it will, just not when you think it will. And that's the thing, so many people think that if you're invested in these markets, you have to know exactly when something is going to pump. Otherwise, you can't possibly trade it or you can't possibly be successful. It's really, that's the difference here, is that my experience with these markets is that you can be very confident in something happening and eventually it will. But if you're trying to perfectly time it, you don't have a 0% chance of that happening, but you have a very low chance of that happening. And that is exactly why, the biggest reason why psychology and sentiment dictates these markets is because most people cannot separate the fact that we get good news and we don't pump right away. They can't rectify that. They can't justify it. They think, well, if we got good news, this market has to pump immediately. And similarly, the thing that makes it worse is that very often in bear markets, it's the opposite. Meaning in a bear market, let's say we get bad news, very often the price actually dumps pretty quickly after the bad news. So it's hard to wrap your head around. It's not always the case, but where we get news and we don't pump, meaning, for example, when the Bitcoin spot ETFs were approved, we did pump. But again, it took even a couple weeks to ramp up before it actually started. If you remember back to the beginning of 2024 when these ETFs were approved, actually, they were approved right around here. We got this spike up right here. Remember this? Spike up. But then look what happened. We dumped for a couple weeks and then we started exploding. But then look at this, guys. Do you remember how the sentiment was during this whole time? This was 8 months of sideways / dumping. It was a downward bias and sideways for 8 months. And I've said this a million times, But most of the moves in this market happen in a very small amount of time. Meaning if you take a 2-year period where Bitcoin is in a bull market and going up, most of that time, even though if you look at a chart, it's up, most of that time though is sideways and boring. And then you could go to sleep for a night or just leave, go on vacation for a couple days, come back and realize you missed like 90% of the action. So in one sense, you have to be prepared all the time for the pump, because basically, as simple and dumb as it sounds, the pump usually happens when it's least expected. And the more and more people think, okay, the pump's not coming, the pump's never going to come, you just need that to keep increasing. You need the people to keep thinking, okay, it's never going to come. And then when it finally hits that maximum where, like, I don't know, maybe 80% of people think the pump is never going to come, that's usually when the pump comes. So think about this. We've been trading sideways now for, like I said, almost 3 months. We traded sideways for like 8 months here. Sentiment was awful. People were thinking for sure. Majority consensus was for sure. We are about to dump back to 30 to 40K. But that's not what happened. And this, as I said, sometimes fundamentally things do pump, because when Trump won the election, we did go straight up for a couple weeks. We did actually get a massive pump. Now, one thing the market is waiting for is a Bitcoin strategic reserve. That is one thing. But as well, even if we don't get, let's say we get a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but it's not for 6 months from now. Do I think we're not going to pump for 6 months? No, I think we are going. I think it's all percent chance. Like, as I keep saying, nobody knows exactly when we will pump. But I think, for one, the longer we keep getting really good news and don't pump, the higher we're going to go when we actually do pump. So that's one thing that I'm very much expecting. And honestly, the market has a good track record of that being accurate, in terms of that seems to be what the market does for the most part. But as well, you look at something like this weekly chart as we kind of just drift down. Whereas again, we actually have, as I showed that image, potentially a ascending triangle with a possibility of breaking to the upside here over the next few weeks. But for the most part, guys, the price does not pump when you think it will. And just because we're getting all of this good news, that's why I'm more bullish than ever. Because let's paint a picture. Let's say for another 6 months, I don't think it'll be that long, but let's say for another 3 months, what if we don't get a pump? What if we trade sideways for another 1, 2, maybe 3 months? I can make one promise to you. Sentiment will be very bad. I mean, sentiment is already pretty bad. I read my comments. People are scared. They're new to the market and they don't understand, and they don't have patience, and that's fine. It's not fine, but I mean, you should definitely learn to be better about that. But for sure, if the market trades sideways, especially with a downward bias for the next 1 to 2 months, the sentiment is going to be awful. Keep that in mind. I can guarantee you that people are going to be very upset. But the reason I'm so bullish is because I understand, with all of this news we're getting, think of it like this, the more good news we get, the higher the chance of us going even higher is. And I almost don't care when it happens. Obviously, I would prefer if it happened tomorrow as opposed to 3 months from now, right? I guess. But I mean, to be fair, I am literally just using all of my income, all my disposable income. I am just continuously putting into this market, and I'm not stressing about it. I think too many people, I stare at the charts a lot, but I think too many people get too emotional about the charts not pumping. Do something else, right? Think about what's happening, all the fundamental things. There's not a single place on the planet I would rather have my money right now than in Bitcoin. This is exactly where I want it. It's exactly what I think the best opportunity is. And if it takes a day, a week, or a couple months until we absolutely shatter these patterns and start going up, it really doesn't make much of a difference. So keep in mind, I don't think that, one day you are probably going to wake up and you're going to see a 10 or 15% candle. You're going to see something like this. And you're going to be asking yourself, what happened? And I'm giving you the answer now. Nothing new happened. It's all the things that have been happening that were objectively good for the market. And now the market's pumping. Really don't overthink it. And that's one reason day traders are so rarely successful, is because they try to, make the exact trade every moment, predict everything to them. You don't need to do that. If you have a long enough time horizon, if you have a thesis and you stick to it, you can just literally close your computer and go do something else and become very profitable if you just stick to your thesis and you're right. If we're right that Bitcoin's about to go well above $200,000, $300,000 this year, and it does, what does it matter if it happens tomorrow or a week or a month from now? And the funniest thing too is I get comments of people saying like, oh, you're just providing hopium. They'll say like, oh, Bitcoin's going to crash to 70K. Do you realize how dumb you sound? If you would have said Bitcoin is going to crash to 70K 5 years ago, people would be losing their minds because they'd be like, whoa, are you telling me that Bitcoin went well above 70K? And that's what blows my mind is like, I don't know why people think they have like a gotcha moment when they say, oh, Bitcoin might crash. Are you guys aware of what Bitcoin has done over the past decade, let alone even just the past 2 years? Okay, going from about 15K to where we are right now. This is quite literally the opposite of bearish. It's extremely bullish. And look at it for Pete's sake. We haven't really even been trading sideways that long. If you really think about it, we haven't. We traded over double this length in a dumpier position from March of 2024 until basically well over half of 2024 was just bad, boring price action. And is that rare? No, not really. Look what happened back before the last bull market. It was pretty bad, right? Even during the bull market, there was extended periods of time of boringness. But realistically, to be fair, this period right here was awful. It was pretty boring, and it was very I guess boring is the best word. It was like really hard to watch price action every day when we did this for like 8 months. I do not think we're going to be doing that again for 8 months because I simply think this environment is far too bullish for that to happen. For Pete's sake, $90,000 has been defended violently every time we get anywhere near 90,000 US dollars. Now we have another higher low on the screen or on the charts as of February 3rd, Monday, just a couple of days ago. Clearly, $90,000 is getting gobbled up. Look at this. Let's say we get a flash crash where what if we got significantly brought below this? I think it would get bought up and pump nearly immediately, which I don't even think we're going to necessarily get that. I'm just saying there is so much pressure. There is so much demand for Bitcoin at these levels. And that will translate, I think, to altcoins. Is it possible altcoins don't have quite as big percentage-wise as a run as they've had maybe in the past? It's possible, considering how much attention is going into Bitcoin. But I ultimately believe, too, altcoins are going to benefit massively from it at some point. But it's going to be when people least expect it. I think the game has changed a little bit. I think people think that they can just do the same recipe, just buy Bitcoin, just buy top alts, and rotate from Bitcoin to higher cap alts. And then after they're done pumping, switch to smaller cap and rinse and repeat. I think the game is changing a little bit in the sense it's harder to time and predict the exact cycle of where the gains are going to go. But really, if you're invested in Bitcoin and in some of these top alts, I think the best thing to do is just not really anything. But if you do want to catch some crazy trades and really benefit from some of these moves, again, the best time to buy is when we get completely dumped on. And right now, honestly, Bitcoin isn't even that dumped on, but altcoins are. And that's why I think altcoins actually represent a fairly good risk to reward ratio over the next few months. Altcoins have just, have been obliterated really quickly. We can just look at Bitcoin dominance. Look, that's a gigantic wick, up to almost 65%. That truly is capitulation. People selling altcoins into Bitcoin. I even get comments about it lately all the time. A lot of people are saying, oh, I'm thinking about selling my altcoins for Bitcoin, or I already have. And for most people, when it reaches a certain percent, that is typically when we actually see these markets start pumping massively, meaning the altcoin market. And get signed up with FEMX or BITUNIX below if you want to buy Bitcoin, altcoins, or trade. Thank you for the game.